This is the story of my first attempt to raise 8 children and 2 babies in Rimworld with only an adult vampire. That's right, kids. Kill the insect. Why is everyone starving? Oh god. Why did you punch his leg off? Lachi, you literally murdered half of the children yourself. That was the basic story of attempt 1, but what about attempt 2? Shelter day 1. Seems like things are going well. Guess it's time for some skull extraction. As you can see, my first 2 attempts did not go very well, and I knew I would need to change something about the challenge. Designer babies. You heard me, the crispiest, CRISPR-esque things on the rim. Now, normal children, useless. Throw in the trash. Designer babies, day be good. No longer would my days be plagued with 5-year-olds chopping each other's legs off and 9-year-olds beheading babies. My new plan was to develop several custom genomes that would make my life on the rim livable. The WIST genome allowed for its owners to be talented farmers, while the Outids were only concerned with construction. The one Pensiformer would be the colony cook, and the Dolix would be our warrior. Our story truly begins in the middle of a tropical jungle. 8 children and 2 babies find themselves stranded, with their only adult caretaker being Otis, the very mature 16-year-old vampire. Landing next to a dilapidated building, the children quickly got to work, transforming the structure into a makeshift shelter for the night. Vladislav, the Outid, worked on the construction of the actual walls, while the other children simply helped move the heavy wooden logs to where they were needed. By the first night, they had successfully made beds for most of the colonists and a crib for one of the babies, but there was still much to do for the colony to truly be safe. The first and most pressing issue to take care of after shelter was food. In both of my previous attempts, starvation had resulted in mental breaks that would then lead to deaths throughout the colony. Imagine getting so upset because you're a little hungry that you punch someone's leg off. Anyways, since it would be a few days before fields could be seeded, I decided to send our Dolix into the jungle to hunt for food. But to do this, she needed a weapon. So I ordered Castro, one of the young children, to craft a short bow. Once the weapon was crafted, the responsibility of feeding the entire colony fell onto the shoulders of Genevieve. She was our Dolix, our great warrior. Without her, we would essentially be defenseless and foodless. But I'm not heartless, so I ordered her only to hunt nice animals that would not attempt to murder her. While Genevieve was working on getting actual animals that we would eat, the rest of the colony began construction of a storage area for the food that we would eventually convert into a fridge once our immediate food problems had been solved. By the end of the 3rd day, children had finally started to work in the fields. Now, I don't want anyone complaining about child labor. This right here, this is what an unpaid internship looks like, and everyone should be happy to do it. Anyways, the field work is super important because the 2 babies, Beto and Jiang, cannot eat the same food as everyone else. They either have to be nursed by their mothers or fed baby food. But due to the fact that their mothers are nowhere to be found, we needed a consistent source of baby food. It is made from plant matter rather than meat, so even though the animals that Genevieve was supplying to the colony would be able to feed the 8 children and Otis, we needed to have stable rice production before the small supply of baby food that the babies were holding at the start of the colony ran out. By the children's 4th day on the rim, the main room of our base was complete, along with the skeleton of the fridge area. The small fields that I had prioritized had been planted, and now all of the WIST had nothing to do, so I decided to expand the field so that the colony would never have to deal with the threat of starvation, the terrible illness that plagued my first 2 attempts. The new fields were quickly sown, giving the colony much more food to look forward to, but several of the fields were devoted to other plants. Smoke leaf could be a good source of silver, while heel root was needed to stabilize our medicine supply, and cotton could be used for a variety of useful applications. With the colony truly feeling comfortable, Castro proposed that they should come up with a name for their faction. The children all agreed that the Child Empire would be a proper and noble name, while the nursery seemed fitting for their small base. The nursery had experienced relative peace for their first few days on the rim, but on these backwater worlds, peace never lasts. The colony of children was raided by the Toxoid Toxers, who sent a single soldier named Giggles armed with a shotgun. We could not allow the funny yet violent man to get near the defenseless children, so I did what needed to be done. After drafting Otis and Genevieve, who was now a true child intern, I ordered the 2 to engage Giggles. Otis ran in close, swinging his steel longsword to and fro, while Genevieve fired shots from her short bow, but missed. Eventually, the confrontation ended when Otis was able to sink his sword into Giggles, who probably thought that this was not a laughing matter. This combat proved to the members of the nursery, but more consequentially to the rest of the rim, that the colonists could take care of themselves. With her newly acquired shotgun, Genevieve happily got back to work hunting animals. Those 10-year-olds grow up so fast. With everyone falling into their daily daily workflows, several prominent members of the colony begin to emerge. I've extensively talked about Genevieve as well as mentioning Vladislav, but many of the other children were making names for themselves. O'Neill, the pensiformer, was the colony cook, designed to know all about the culinary arts and to never sleep. He spent all of his days and nights in the kitchen, providing meals crafted with love for all the others in the colony to enjoy. There was also Annabelle, a high mate who was not able to help with the manual labor throughout the nursery, but spent her days caring for the two babies, as well as working to improve the moods of those around her. Castro and Alina became a superhuman duo, spearheading most of the farming projects throughout the colony. As the days passed, their skills grew and grew like the plants they soothed. Hiroko and the two babies were still much too young to be of much help yet, and I have no idea what Alex was doing. I never really cared for that one. Well, that's not exactly true. You see, Bito and Yang are babies, meaning they can't get up and walk around, but that doesn't mean they don't produce anything. Otis has this need, a need for blood. We had a good stash of blood packs, but they're a little expensive to extract, but we thankfully had a solution to this. We happen to have two little blood banks that regenerate. So, yeah. Anyways, the next interesting event occurred in the early morning of the 7th of spring. A wild woman named Nurov had wandered into the land controlled by the colony. As an impet and being full of really good skills, she could prove to be a promising new colonist, but unfortunately we had no chance of taming her as Otis's handling was much too low, and I did not have anywhere to put her if I tried to arrest her, so I decided to just let her be for now. Nurov's sudden appearance did point to a concerning fact about the colony. It had no defenses, so the children began construction of a massive wall to protect the central building and fields. This would hopefully keep raiders at bay, but also the occasional predators who could stalk our young children. As the construction of the wall continued, Otis spent more and more of his days researching. He truly believed that for the colony to be successful, they would have to have access to many different technologies. After 4-ish days on the land of the colony, Nurov decided that the hunter-gatherer lifestyle was not worth it when there was a massive stash of food in a walled area. Now, Nurov did not decide to join the colony. No, that would make too much sense. Nurov decided to live in our fridge. I really don't think Nurov minded living in our fridge at first. With the construction of the wall coming to a close, Otis decided that they should build a large warehouse on the interior of the wall to the northwest of the base. For no reason at all. I also started planting a large field of psychoid. The two are not related. Psychoid is just a really cool plant and I like looking at it. The fact that Otis also finished psychite refining at the same time is you see, chemistry is an important subject to teach the youngins. The temperatures throughout the colony increased as summer neared. People tried to stay cool through different strategies. The wisps could often be found lying under a tree, giving them some shade, while others would simply try to lay on the cool ground. I had not been paying much attention to this as no one had heat stroke yet, but I was shown just how drastic the heat was by Annabelle of all people. Seeing that the bedroom that everyone slept in was at a fairly dangerous temperature, Annabelle decided it would be much safer to keep the babies in the freezer, so she'd just toss them in where they could hang out with Nurov. I discovered this when changing the temperature on a cooler before noticing a baby propped up against the vent. I immediately ordered the construction of some wooden coolers so that Annabelle would stop tossing Bito and Yang into the freezer. With the warehouse nearing completion, I placed a chemistry lab inside of it so that the children could learn science, something that is very important. Those psychoid plants look a little weird, but it's probably fine. By the end of the spring, the freezer was finally up and running. While observing my handiwork, I noticed that Nurov was still inside of it, shivering on the floor. On closer inspection, I discovered that she had extreme hypothermia. That is why I could never recommend sleeping in a freezer. Even though the spring was almost over, the Toxoid Toxers decided to raid the nursery once again. The fight was over quickly, and Genevieve got her first kill. Imagine being ordered to conduct a raid on a colony that all of your scouts say only has a couple of kids. You get there, and your stomach gets blown up by an 11-year-old wielding one of your own faction's shotguns. Karma. The beginning of the summer brought with it a tragedy. Nurov finally died. She froze to death on the freezer floor. I was joking, it's not a tragedy, you food-stealing vermin. I also noticed that it had been a month since the children and Otis had landed at the nursery. This first month, we had made so much progress in securing our home, and no one had died. We repelled raiders, put babies in freezers, and grew a boatload of science experiments, or so I thought at the time. Those psychoid plants are really starting to look kinda like my small potato field. Oh, also Alex became an adult at the age of 13. Such a failure, Alex. I never liked him. As the colony began to work on another warehouse, this one is not for drugs, disaster struck as half of the children suddenly fell ill with sleeping sickness. Genevieve, Castro, Alina, and Vladislav made up the infected. I was not too concerned as the disease is apparently not very deadly, and it just takes a long time to recover from it. Because of this, I decided that it would probably be fine if the children continued to work while sick. They're unpaid interns, they shouldn't expect to get days off. After his 100% non-drug related escapades were over, Otis also started to work on researching weaponry. Giving the rest of the children weapons would make the whole colony a lot safer, and it would make me less anxious about the constant trips that many of the children would take to the outside of the colony walls to skygaze. While I was once again expanding the field that I believed to be filled with psychoid plants, a transport pod crashed near the nursery. Inside, we found a man named Tony, who was suffering from paralytic ambasia. He had good stats and was an adult, so I decided to take him into the colony. It had been a few days since several of the colonists had fallen ill with sleeping sickness. While doing a simple checkup on Vladislav's condition, I discovered that his infection was quickly outpacing his immune system. This was bad, and after checking the others, I discovered that all of them were still in a dire situation. I soon began to order those who were infected to stay in bed. The issue now was that we did not have an effective doctor, which might be part of the reason that things got so bad in the first place. Our best doctor at the time was Tony, but he would not recover for another 2 months, and our next best doctor was Vladislav, one of the infected. To add to the chaos, we were raided by the clan of Ito Dowat. They sent a single man armed with a small knife. He was not in too good of shape either, having minor asthma, a peg leg, heat stroke, and no stomach. Without much concern, I sent Otis out to take care of him, so that I would not have to keep tabs on him while trying to deal with the sleeping sickness situation. I did not want to send Genevieve because she was still very ill with sleeping sickness. Otis was well equipped to win the fight. He had a much higher melee skill than his opponent and all of his vampiric powers. He lost? The vampire lost. Otis lost the fight, and before he could recover, and before anyone could make it out to save him, the raiders scooped him up and ran away. This was the colony's first loss, and it was a major one. Although we still had the skills necessary to stay alive, we had lost our one and only researcher. Now, the only healthy adult was Alex. I hate Alex so much. As the sickness approached its final stages, Genevieve looked as if she could pull through. Alina was going to be fine. Castro was in critical condition, as well as Vladislav. Even losing just those two would be terrible for the nursery. Vladislav was our only constructor, and Castro was one of our oldest and most skilled gardeners. While I was frantically trying to think of ways to keep my colonists alive, I was happy to see that O'Neill had made it to adulthood. If I had to choose my favorite colonists at this point, they would be Annabelle, Alina, and O'Neill. So I was glad that at least one of them had made it to the very adult age of 13. On the same day, Beto turned from baby to child, finally learning how to walk. As he was now old enough, I had to make a decision. An important decision on whether to enslave the 3-year-old or to let him remain as a free colonist. I decided to let him stay as a colonist, not that he won't also be an unpaid intern. He's just not a child slave. There's a difference. All of these aging up events added a little positivity to the gloomy atmosphere that had begun to envelop the colony. Unfortunately, this would not last. 9 days after Vladislav, Genevieve, Alina, and Castro came down with the infection, the first child lost their life. Vladislav, our only constructor, was the first to go. I decided once he was buried that we should have a funeral, so that we might possibly increase the colony's mood. Midway through the ceremony, this proved to be a bad idea, as Genevieve, still extremely ill and had decided to come to the ceremony, keeled over. It was thankfully still a heartwarming funeral. And if the death of my prized constructor and the potential deaths of many other colonists were not bad enough, Alex started the harvest of the psychoid leaves, which I noticed were potatoes. I had waited days and days for these cash crops, and now I had more food than I would ever need. How many potatoes do you think are in this giant field? Thousands. Something like 8,000 potatoes. Our entire freezer could not fit that many potatoes. While I was fuming about potatoes, Castro passed away as well from his sickness. As he was being buried, Genevieve also passed. Now, Vladislav's death was bad because we do not have any other good constructors, but it would be fairly simple to train another. Castro was one of the wisps, but we have plenty of those. Genevieve, on the other hand, was our only remaining soldier, meaning that the colony was now completely defenseless except for a few spike traps at the entrance of the base. Castro's funeral was lackluster, so I immediately had Genevieve's, which was a good funeral. Thank goodness. This may have been due to the sudden awakening of Tony, the surgeon. Wow, good on you, Tony, for recovering after everyone died from a very treatable sickness. Anyways, this was a huge boon for the colony as we once again had an adult who had good skills, most importantly melee, medical, and crafting. Just in general, there isn't like a very specific thing that needs to be crafted. After the horrible losses to sickness that really could have been prevented with better planning, I decided to construct a small hospital so that something like this would never happen again. We had now lost a total of 4 from our starting 11, which left us with 3 adults, O'Neill, Alex, and Tony, 4 children, Annabelle, Alina, Hiroko, and Bito, and the one remaining baby, Yang. To deal with the problem of not having a constructor anymore, I decided to train Alina into the role, since it's not like we are low on food or anything. I decided to go about this by forcing the child to just build a bunch of tables. There was probably a better way to do this, but I just went with that. Later, when a local cassowary went mad, I sent Alex to go out and deal with it, giving him the shotgun, but in the process, he was disemboweled and almost bled out. But Tony had to come and save the boy. Did I intentionally not put Alex behind tons of spike traps? Some would say that. Others would say that I'm just bad at Rimworld. Late one evening, Annabelle, the sweet highmate who could never hurt a fly, decided to stargaze outside of the colony's walls. Now, I let many of the colonists do this, as they would not stay out for too long and it was a good way for them to relax. Unfortunately, during this adventure, she was being hunted by a local panther. Sending the closest colonist to try and save her, I was horrified as my favorite non-problematic colonist was eaten right in front of O'Neill. Now, you might think that Annabelle was unimportant, but she improved everyone's moods, and more importantly, she essentially raised the babies, and Yang was still... Oh, well... Anyways, I guess she was not needed. Over the next few days, the colony experienced constant mental breaks, which highlighted what losing Annabelle really meant, but eventually the colony persevered and made it through its ordeal. The psychoid situation finally figured out I wanted to begin the cook. Now, Tony is our best crafter, and after he started rolling smoke leaf, I decided to nickname him Mr. White, and gave him the title of the cook. Almost immediately, Alina took interest in Mr. White's work, and spent hours watching him to learn all about science. Wow. What a good intern. Gotta start him young. With the fall coming to an end, I finally decided to start construction of the bedrooms for each of the individual colonists. This was much easier than it would have been earlier in the playthrough, as now we had way less bedrooms to construct. A few days into the winter, the colony suffered another death. Hiroko had unfortunately contracted malaria and passed away several days later. One more death, one more child who would never make it to adulthood. This leaves us with only 3 children remaining, the 2 original babies and Alina. The colony was not in very good shape at the moment. Because I kept refusing to focus on giving people clothes, many began to experience hypothermia in the cold winter weather, and Yang had already lost several toes and her left hand to frostbite. I mean, she's 3, so it's not like she was going to be using that hand for much anyways. But discovering this forced me to finally order up the crafting of clothes for our 3 nude adults and child. To deal with the fact that Yang had lost a hand, I decided to replace this with a wooden one. Now, Mr. White was a talented surgeon, and I was sure the situation could not get much worse. What was he gonna do? Fail the surgery and cut off her entire arm by accident? That would be ridiculous. To make up for his drastic mistake, Mr. White worked tirelessly to craft clothes for all of the colonists, and within a few days, they no longer had to suffer through the previously inhospitable temperatures. To top off the good news, Alina finally became an adult. Let's go. 3 out of 10. That's like a 30% success rate. But we still had another 2 kids to raise, and if we were successful, they would bring the success rate to 50%. Well, yeah, we'd be failing, but it's the effort that counts. Thankfully, before any more of the colonists were lost, we were joined by another member, Josh. Josh came to us in a similar situation to Mr. White, suffering from paralytic aphasia. As the nursery's first winter came to a close, it promised a new beginning. In the year since Alina, O'Neill, Alex, Bito, and Yang landed on the grounds of the colony, they had lost many friends and made several new ones. And now their year of hard work had led to this, Mr. White's lab. Now, it was not just Mr. White working in the lab. Many of the unpaid interns, when not working in the fields, would be hard at work crafting yayo and flake. The psychoid field was finally up and running, and so was this colony's... No, this cartel's economy. What could the next year bring with it? Fortune or death? It did not take us long to look death in the face once more. Shortly after spring started, I had a deja vu moment. Beto had decided to go out to Skygaze, near where his caretaker had previously lost her life. He experienced a similar event. A very similar event. A panther began to stalk Beto. Upon realizing this, I called the young boy back to the colony and sent Mr. White to save him. Beto was fortunately successful in running through the colony door, and Mr. White quickly closed the door behind him. He was now safe, right? The panther would have a hard time getting through the door, and it would probably walk through the spike tunnel, right? No, you see, the colony had two entrances, and one of them, the one on the right side of the base, I had never claimed, so the panther simply opened up the door and was now inside of the colony. Seeing this, I threw my nearest colonists into rooms. The panther then decided to kill a cassowary instead of Beto, giving Alex and Mr. White the chance to hunt the dangerous animal down, killing it. Only a few days went by before we were raided once again, this time by the Molopolwuk, who had sent 3 armed soldiers. Knowing that I would not be able to win the fight with only Alex and Mr. White, I drafted Alina and O'Neill as well, giving the 2 daggers. And the battle commenced. Shots were fired and Molotovs were thrown, and after the fires cleared and the dust settled, we emerged, victorious, securing more firearms for ourselves. Although many had suffered injuries throughout the fight, they were quick to recover. With the colony approaching the halfway point through spring, the yayo and flake production skyrocketed as more and more psychite was harvested from our giant field. Whenever the next trader came around, the colony would be in a position to make a lot of money. The rest of spring would finish without incident, but the summer brought with it another fight to the death. Yang, who had been skygazing, was hunted by another panther, and before anyone could save them, the young child lost her life. Now, this was a grisly sight. We had lost one of the original babies of the colony. I can't even imagine how those in the nursery felt, knowing that even though they had escaped the clutches of death over and over, they were still well within its reach. Yang's death must have hit Beto especially hard. The two were practically with each other non-stop since the founding of the colony. To deal with all of his negative emotions, Beto decided to go out and skygaze, probably in memory of his recently deceased friend, who happened to be laying mere meters away. But Beto and Yang's fresh corpse skygazed for a few hours. Yes, what a positive experience. Take your +4 mood buff for that, it was definitely worth it. The rest of the summer was mostly uneventful. However, there was an interesting side story. One day, a transport pod crashed near the nursery, and inside was an injured man. Now, he was not interested in joining the colony, and we had no obligation to help, but since not much was going on, we decided to take him in and nurse him back to health. Now, this would not be worth mentioning without what happened next. You see, Barker finally recovered from his injuries during a manhunter pack raid. I had placed all of the other colonists inside to let the Arctic foxes die to the spike traps, but Barker, not being one of the colonists, had a different idea and ended up in a fist fight with one of them. Not wanting the man to die, I quickly sent the colonists out to save him, but he suffered several grave injuries. Mr. White quickly tended to the man, saving his life for a second time. Several days later, Barker finally managed to leave the map without getting mauled, which gave us a +19 relation with his faction. Remember a while ago when I accidentally planted thousands of potatoes? Well, we had only decreased the potato population in storage by about 1,000, and it had been over a year since then. Potatoes covered the freezer floor still, and overflowed into our general warehouse storage. But this would not last. In the early fall of our second year on the Rim, a trade caravan approached the colony. They were thankfully a bulk goods trader, so Mr. White was able to sell them 7,317 potatoes. I guess that the potatoes did come in handy. Using our new funds, we acquired the materials to finally have a stable weapons production system. The colony would finally be armed, which would make it much safer. Over the next year, the colony faced many trials, but it overcame them easily. Alina sowed fields, O'Neill cooked, Mr. White also cooked, Alex did Alex things, Beto had the perfect childhood, and Josh, our newest member, made all of the things the colony needed to continue functioning. As the year went by, the colony invested more and more into animals, starting out small before they were forced to plant a giant field of hay to sustain the giant herds we had acquired. Everything had gone well for almost a year. No deaths, no grave injuries, the totally non-suspicious chemistry experiments in the back were going fantastic as well. But all good stories have to end. During the early days of the fall of 5502, we were raided by the tribe of Colsod, The nursery had invested in some marginal defensive measures. The colonists had built a very long corridor filled with rocks and spike traps. They had also been armed mostly with bolt-action rifles to be able to pick off targets from a safe distance. The strategy ended up being a mistake against the invading tribe. The Kholsad were not a people interested in using any ranged weapons in combat. Instead, they preferred to be up close and personal with their victims using clubs and knives. Due to the unfortunate fact that many of the spike traps were not operational, the invaders quickly made their way up to the members of the colony before engaging them in melee combat. The battle was intense and bloody, with our only man left standing at the end being Josh. Every other colonist lay bleeding to death on the ground. Knowing that I only had time to save one or two, I had to make a choice on who would live and who would die. Even though he was not one of the original members of the colony, I had grown attached to Mr. White during our time together on the Rim. The choice was between Mr. White, Beto, who was still a child, and Alex. Or so you thought. I hate Alex. In fact, I'm glad his left eye was freshly cut out. I eventually had Josh begin to haul Mr. White to the nearby hospital, as Mr. White was still our only good doctor. Josh placed our cook in bed before deciding to go grab medicine that was lying on the outside of the colony way to the north to treat him. Before realizing my mistake, I watched in horror as Josh then decided to have a mental break, and before walking 2 steps, he collapsed on the ground due to the blood loss and pain. With every colonist unable to function, a man in black appeared. But would he be able to save the colony? Bajork happened to be a doctor, so I ordered him to rush to Mr. White's aid. But before he could save him, O'Neill, Beto, Mr. White, and Josh all died. Bajork started to tend to Taff, a new colonist, and as he tended to Alina, he ran out of medicine and left to get more. But like Josh before him, he decided to go for the medicine that was outside of the base. Realizing what he had done, I checked to see if Alina would still be able to pull through, but she was losing blood too quickly and ended up passing away along with the rest of the colony's members. All except Taff, who had joined like a week ago. And that was the story. A story about a 16-year-old vampire who wanted to try and raise 10 designer babies on the Rim. We had funny moments and sad moments, and funny, sad moments, but overall it was an enjoyable experience, and I learned a lot about the new Rimworld systems. There will be more Rimworld in the future, but I think it is time for the nursery to rest.